Hello, my chicklets. Thank you for stopping by. Welcome back to our month of stories by Lost in Scribbles. I'm so excited to be reading all of these for you, and again, make sure to check out both the artist and the writer in the description below. Without further ado, let me read for you Let Me Extinguish Your Flames by Lost in Scribbles. Virgil had never woken up that sweaty in a long time. He was practically bathing in it, exhaustedly groaning under his covers. Virgil came to the frustrating realization that the smell of his bodily fluids staining his sheets became too overwhelming to ignore. Like he was trapped in a slimy spiderweb. He needed to get out, as much as his body was protesting. As a counterattack against his fatigue, Virgil threw the blankets off of him in one go. His first instinct, grab a glass of water from the bathroom. With much ease, almost as if he habitually had trouble sleeping and would get up 2 or 3 times every night, Virgil stretched his heavy arms as he navigated his pitch-black room. After no more than 3 steps, he reached out his hand for the door handle. As soon as he opened the door, a slightly fresher and colder air from the hallway slapped him in the face. It made him all teary-eyed, squinting his eyes at the light shining through the corridor. He rubbed his sweaty palms over his eyelids to try and adjust. Funnily enough, he felt more blind, waddling through the mindscape's uncharacteristically bright corridor than within the comfort of his own dark little nest. Not to mention, the more steps he took down the hallway, the more he was sweating. Drops down the creases in his forehead, his pajamas sticking to his arms and legs while he dragged his feet over the floor. Virgil felt a headache setting in, the light burning his eyes and not allowing him to adjust at all. Out of memory, he knew he was passing by Roman's door, Patton's, and "Wrong with me!" Virgil froze in his steps, heart beating in his neck while a small stream of sweat trickled down the side of it and hit his collarbone. Virgil stood still in front of the dark blue door. He had never heard him scream like that before. "Low?" A tremble in his voice, along with a little pant. Virgil knocked on the door. He could swear the wooden door frame almost felt crisp and brittle when he knocked. "Hey, you okay in there?" he asked more persistently. Those flare-ups of chilling colds running through his body that were quickly washed over by a wave of heat made it hard for him to focus on whether he heard a response. Pretty sure Logan fell silent, except for a faint whistling or panting, as if he was catching his breath. "Lo, can I come in?" Virgil swallowed to soften his throat, suddenly dry and tight, which resulted in his question sounding more like a pathetic yelp. Not that it mattered. It was like Logan didn't even hear him over the sound of his own heaving. Virgil strengthened his resolve, wiped some sweat off his forehead, and turned the handle of Logan's door. His heart dropped for a moment, fearing Logan may have locked his room. Not that he had ever done before, but he wouldn't have put it past him given his outburst seconds earlier. Fate seemed to be on his side. Logan's door creaked open, and Virgil glanced in between the gaps of the doorframe and the wall. He remembered the last time he came over to Logan's room, when he couldn't sleep. His walls were covered in stars and constellations all the way to the ceiling. A dark blue-violet hue which created this tranquil and calm space for Virgil to ease his mind that had been tormented by nightmares last week. Tonight, however, the room's interior made it appear like Logan was the one being tormented. Instead of a dark starry sky, the walls of Logan's room were black like ash and almost crackling like a fire. Tiny reddish sparkles like embers from a fireplace made the room glow, reaching temperatures that felt close to those of a sauna. Virgil knew why he'd been sweating so much tonight. Not that anything in the room could have made him more distressed than witnessing the state of mind that Logan was in. He was aggressively pacing through his room, back curled over and close to hyperventilating, rubbing and pounding at his chest as if he couldn't breathe. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, his glasses cracked underneath his table. "Stop! Make it stop!" The desperation in Logan's cracked and shrill voice had Virgil rendered silent for a few seconds too long. Logan turned his back to him, the back of his shirt drenched in sweat like Virgil's was, now that light from the corridor shone inside the room. And before Virgil had approached any closer, Logan grabbed the backrest of his desk chair and threw his beloved piece of furniture across the room. It crashed into his bookshelf, creating such a loud echo that Virgil's whole body shook out of its trance. "Logan, calm down. Come here. What's going on?" Virgil kept asking questions that he knew deep down wouldn't reach him. Almost as if an entity had gotten hold of him, Logan's figure was enveloped in a violently cracking hue that burned into Virgil's palms the moment he grabbed him by the shoulders. But he'd had to stand worse heat than that. Bathing in a pool of his own smoldering sweat at night had garnered enough resolve in Virgil to at least withstand this heat, for his sake. "Lo, look at me," Virgil insisted with a sterner voice, trying to turn Logan around even though every muscle in his body was fighting against Virgil's every tug. Logan's torso heaved up and down to his heavy panting as he leaned on the edge of his desk. Virgil never realized how broad and firm his shoulders were. "Hey, you need to breathe. Slowly. Remember, just like you Leave me alone!" Like a dragon erupting flames out of its mouth, Logan turned to face Virgil in a fit of pure rage. Virgil instinctively crossed his arms in front of him defensively. Orange. A fiery orange was glowing around Logan's irises. Virgil thought his eyes were deceiving him for a second. He hoped they were, though, combined with Logan's puffy red eyes and undeniable bags and drenched cheeks, this was undeniably real. Virgil fought against every instinct in him to run and get as far away from this influence as possible. But he couldn't leave Logan. He couldn't and wouldn't. Perhaps becoming aware of his body movements, Logan took a firm hold of his wrist and tucked his arms back against his chest. He clenched his teeth and panted in raspy breaths, fighting back sobs clogging up his words. It was a pain to watch, let alone experience. A quick thought made Virgil wonder if this was what the others, mostly Logan, would have to bear witness to during one of Virgil's attacks. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Wouldn't want to hurt you," Logan whimpered, taken aback by his own state, his voice growing smaller and frailer. His eyes darted around, anywhere but back at Virgil after snapping at him. Virgil wished he could repress that part that felt lucky they didn't lock eyes again. It had nailed him to the ground. Feeling his heart pounding out of his chest, he swallowed his fear and reached out again. It's okay. I'm all right. I just want to help," Virgil tried, carefully taking a step forward, placing his hands over Logan's and attempting to pry his fingers off his wrist. "Don't hurt yourself like that, Lo. Deep breaths, okay? In and out." If only Virgil was as good at keeping a composed voice, like Logan always seemed to be. He had his fingers clutched tightly around his wrist, all his muscles tense, trying to keep him distracted by counting their breathing together, making sure to maintain eye contact. Slowly but surely, Virgil managed to pry Logan's fingers off. He held Logan's hand in his. His fingers were locked in position like claws. "And out. Okay, good. Virgil mumbled. Logan's eyes were starting to shift again. He intertwined their fingers together, more securely, rubbing his thumbs over Logan's knuckles with their dry and cracked skin. "Let's start counting. It helps. Let's count. Count till 10 or 100 if you need to. Just simple counting." With his chest quickly rising and falling, shuddering with small repressed cries, Logan pursed his lips together and nodded. They started counting in a steady, gradual rhythm. Both of them must have noticed 10 would be too early to stop, so without a pause or stutter in their pace, they continued along together until they reached 20, 30. Tears were quietly rolling down Logan's cheeks while his breathing slowly calmed down. He pinched Virgil's hand to the beat of their counting, which soon became fueled by Logan's voice alone. Virgil was just starting to process what had happened. Not only did he generally have a hard time dealing with tense situations like these and seeing others in an upset state of mind, but this was Logan. The side who had maintained, or rather, had always tried to maintain, his rational composure. Something Virgil very much appreciated and needed, especially when he was thrown into another spiral of worries which had become the usual. Nevertheless, the signs had become clear to him lately that Logan had been repressing whatever doubts or frustrations he had, brushing them off or dismissing them. Virgil had had this aching feeling for a while now that there would come a time when everything spilled out. He just never realized how severe that outburst would look like. How long had Logan been repressing his rage for it to spill to this degree? How long had the others, had Virgil, been ignoring him? 59, 60. Almost a whisper, Logan uttered his next set of numbers with his eyes closed, after which a short silence filled the room. His breathing seemed to have returned to normal, mostly, except that Logan was still clinging to Virgil's hand like a lifeline. "You feeling better?" Virgil asked carefully, waiting for Logan to open his eyes again. Logan looked at his feet when he did, as if embarrassed, and hummed, Okay. Wanna sit down?" One shaky nod was all Virgil needed to guide Logan to his bedside. Like a parent teaching their child to walk, Virgil felt a sense of responsibility somehow to make sure Logan wouldn't buckle through his knees or trip over his own feet. They reached his bed and sat down on the edge, the mattress gently bouncing under their weight. It took Logan a while to realize he'd have to let go of Virgil's hand for them both to sit down. The short, awkward tension before Logan retracted his hand with a brief stammer made blushes appear on both their faces. "So, can you tell me what's going on, Lo? What got you so upset?" Virgil left some distance between them on the bed, close enough for their legs to touch if Logan wanted to, but far enough away from each other to allow him some space. Frankly, Virgil wouldn't be opposed to that. Not only was he still worked up from the whole ordeal, Logan's room was finally starting to return to its previous aesthetic, soft blue and starry skies, overshadowing the ash black and ember fire heating up the room. That wasn't to say Virgil had stopped sweating. As another wave of cold and heat washed over him, he carefully untucked his arms from his sleeves and threw the old patched rag on the bed behind him. At least in his short-sleeved shirt, his arms could breathe a little. Logan tangled his fingers around the edge of his bed, knocking his knees together, his brow furrowed and eyes downcast. So clouded over and somber, lost, watery. Now that his pupils weren't obscured by a layer of glass, those signs were crystal clear. "How are you feeling?" Virgil popped the last question, praying this would elicit a response from him, even though he knew he couldn't force him to. "Don't know. I don't know how to." Logan bit his lip, breathed in through his nose. Virgil quietly looked at him, rubbing one hand over his own bare shoulder, not wanting to breach Logan's private space. "Don't know how to describe it, or deal with it. Something came over me when I wanted to propose this." Logan laughed with a scoff and waved weakly toward his desk covered in papers. "This plan to Thomas and the others, but everyone kept talking over me and..." He rubbed his hand over his eyes, sniffling. Virgil wasn't one to instigate physical contact, but he had to consciously keep himself back from throwing his arms around Logan's shoulders. Seeing him this frail and vulnerable made Virgil's chest stir. "It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. And when I came back here..." Logan inhaled deeply through his nose, lifting his head up a little and grabbing the edge of his mattress again. Virgil noticed he had slid his right hand a few inches closer to Virgil's on his right. "My room looked different, and I just couldn't help but feel So... Logan rocked his body back and forth, reliving the memory and the emotions that must have soared through his body. Virgil convinced himself that if it was to keep Logan from spiraling again, that was a valid enough reason to cover the back of Logan's hand with his own. He squeezed his palm over Logan's brass knuckles, interlacing his fingers in between Logan's. If only he could channel some sense of calm and comfort, the way Logan always seemed to be able to do when Virgil needed it most. Given he was anxiety and all, was his presence even any help? He was sure as hell gonna try. Angry? Virgil finished his sentence, hoping to finally open that conversation they all should have had with Logan ages ago. Logan froze in position when hearing that word echo through his room. He nudged his fingers over Virgil's on the cover of his bed. I think there's something wrong with me, Virgil. His heart jumped at how hopeless and small Logan's voice sounded, and the way his gaze matched his tone when they locked eyes. None of this makes sense. I don't understand me anymore, and I'm not allowed to. That's bullshit. Without planning to, Virgil turned inward and tugged Logan's hand toward his lap. Logan lost his balance a little and shifted sideways. Virgil managed to catch him with his other hand by holding Logan's left shoulder. The back of his sleeve was still slightly wet. You are allowed to feel, Logan, just like the rest of us, Virgil insisted, gently but firmly. It may not fit your job description in your mind or whatever. You may think you have to be cold and calculating to be logicked, but that's just bullshit. Logan stared at him hazily but hopeful, anything to rid that emptiness out of his gaze. Virgil attempted to smile and moved his hand up in between Logan's shoulder and neck. Don't think I haven't seen you trying to keep those emotions all bottled up. You've known that you're more than just plain logic, haven't you? That you're actually very sensitive to things? Virgil swallowed, knowing full well the part he'd played in this as well. The things we say, or do, or don't. As if their brainwaves were in sync, Logan and Virgil simultaneously detangled their fingers and pulled one leg up on the bed, sitting across from each other, not letting each other out of their sight. Each of them failing to find any more excuses to not talk about things left unsaid for way too long. And I know those feelings don't make sense, and they're messy and fucked up sometimes, and they can throw you for a loop or make you doubt everything and everyone. A familiar tingle in Virgil's chest made him chuckle sadly. Trust me, I've been there, but that means I can help you figure it out. Virgil moved his hand up again, till he reached the side of Logan's face. As expected, drops of sweat were sticking to his strands of hair as well. Normally, Virgil would be beyond awkward and nervous in engaging in any kind of physical intimacy like this, not knowing what he was doing. Though the way Logan was looking at him with those puffy, wet eyes and trembling jaw, ready to shatter, Virgil couldn't afford not to be the composed one of the two of them for now. We can talk about what caused those feelings to surface, why it made you upset, what you're frustrated about, everything. No judgment, just for us to figure out how to help you deal with them. Okay? Virgil stroked his fingers through Logan's hair and his thumb over his cheek. Logan's face softened and he melted a little in his touch. Still unfocused, his eyes flew across Virgil's chest as if he just noticed he wasn't wearing his hoodie. He frowned briefly, then reached his right hand forward to grab onto his shirt. He must have been seeing hazily without his glasses on. Totally logical. But for some reason, that physical contact was the one that did Virgil in and made his heart race, or made him aware of how fast his heart was racing. He wasn't able to tell. Okay. Logan finally responded, physically holding back his tears. There was a faint nod, a hard swallow, and a tense expression. Low. If If there's anything I can do, just... I don't know what. Logan's voice cracked, ending in something like a whistle. All that restraint to repress his emotions again. Virgil was this close to just tapping him on his cheek and begging him to stop. I don't know why, but I think I might start crying again. Logan stuttered, rubbing his fingers between the creases of Virgil's shirt he was grabbing. So embarrassing. You don't have to see me like this. Like a mess. So if you'd rather leave and not get overwhelmed or... The more Logan tried to talk, the more off-pitch and shaky his voice would get, the more he avoided eye contact with Virgil. Maybe it was a release of all this pent-up tension between them, whatever it was, but Virgil let out a relieved chuckle and stroked the palm of his hand over Logan's cheek before letting it drop in Logan's lap, falling right on top of Logan's other hand. Like hell I'm gonna leave. Virgil shook his head and pinched Logan's hand tightly. You've seen me to be a mess more times than either of us can count, I bet. I want to be here for you, now, even if you think it's embarrassing. Virgil remembered how embarrassed he'd felt, how he would still feel, every time he had to depend on Logan during an episode. The guilt of having to rely on someone else to fix your own problems was still chewing on him. Albeit a little less with every time Logan was prepared to be by his side, for hours, whole nights if he had to be. The least Virgil could do now was return the favor, notwithstanding how much he'd been waiting, hoping for Logan to acknowledge his feelings and, dare he say, help from others, even if you're scared of not knowing what's happening or what you're feeling now. Virgil simply echoed what Virgil had been telling him all those times before, returning the favor. He didn't know why he couldn't wipe that smile off his face. It'll be okay, I promise. Logan made 1 second of eye contact with Virgil before his softened expression faltered once again. Squinting his eyes, bopping his head, and sobs rippling through his torso, he spastically tugged Virgil towards him, burying his face in his shoulder. Perhaps it was a tiny bit of misplaced pride that Virgil was the one to be the caretaker this time around. That made him wrap his arms around Logan with such ease as if he'd done it before. He rubbed little circles between Logan's shoulder blades and cradled the back of his head. Logan's sobs gradually grew louder, years of bottled-up tears finally spilling out. Virgil kept himself sitting upright, rhythmically rubbing his back in a calming pattern, shushing and reassuring him in intervals. He really did learn from the best. Thank you all for listening. Again, that was Let Me Extinguish Your Flames by Lost in Scribbles. I really hope you all enjoyed this one. This is one of the ones I was really excited to read. Make sure to check out the links in the description for both the artist and the writer. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.